Hi all, this is Mike Smith. I want to show you through a Google map that I've put together which allows you to easily see along the rivers and creeks feeding into Brisbane the Bureau of Meteorology plots that look like this. And so what I've done is for each of the measuring stations along, for example, the Bremer River here in blue, or the Lockyer Valley Creek in green, Worrell Creek in red, and Bremer River in orange here, and a couple of other creeks around Brisbane. What I've done is I've plotted these points and then put the link to the Bureau of Meteorology 7-day plot for that point. And that gives you a really convenient way to look at these plots and see what's happening down the river, whilst at the same time getting a feel for the geography and the relative position of these locations. Bearing in mind we've got our major dam here, Lake Wivenhoe, which is for drinking water but also for flood mitigation. And as you may be able to hear in the background, we've got some significant rainfall happening right now. So let me just give you a couple of demonstrations on this plot. One of the interesting things about this presentation here, if you follow the creek line here for the Lockyer Valley Creek, and Lockyer Valley suffered greatly in the 2011. This water comes down from the Toowoomba Ranges, which is off to the west here. A lot of people at that stage thought erroneously that the Lockyer Valley was part of the same catchment as Wivenhoe, but that's not the case. So the geography here is very useful for people to gain an awareness of what's going on. One of the things that really surprised people was the speed with which water moved through this valley and ultimately ended up in the Bremer River. They described it as an inland tsunami. And if we look at the plots for Helidon, Gatton, and then Clarendon, Rifle Range, and then Lowood, you can see how quickly that water moved. What I'm going to do is open up these points in a sequence of tabs, and I'll be very careful about the order that I'm opening them. As you can see, they're opening left to right at the top there. Now, depending on your browser, you may get different behavior, but the idea is to get the tabs for these locations in a logical order so we can see what's going on. So now let's have a look at them. This is the Lockyer Creek at Helidon, and you can see midday Friday was a huge peak, and then a bunch of other subsequent rain events, and then a fall away through today, which is Sunday. And then if we look at the next data point, which is Gatton, you can see the peak was a little bit later, so a few hours after that previous one. You can see that there. And then there was a gradual flow off, a bit of a plateau there, and then another gradual flow off today. And these ups and downs, I presume, represent the effect of the inflows from the tributary creeks. And then the next position is Rifle Range, and you can see there's a different shape going on here. And then Lowood, we get another kind of a different shape here. So if we looked at this position, this position, this position, and then this position. Let's do that again. Helidon, Gatton, Rifle Range Road, and then Lowood. Okay, Rifle Range Road went up and basically peaked early morning Saturday, which is consistent with the movement of this peak along. So the maximum occurred at the time that we might expect it at Rifle Range Road, but then it didn't fall away. And why would that be? Well, that could be because from this point on, Rifle Range Road and Lowood, we're actually under the influence of the Brisbane River, which is being fed from Wivenhoe Dam up here. So let's have a look at Wivenhoe Dam. I might put that just before Lowood here, and you can see there's a steady outflow from Wivenhoe Dam. That's because of the release at the dam wall. So that corresponds to a steady increase at Lowood, and then subsequently maintaining that that level, as well as at Rifle Range Road. So effectively, what's happened is that I believe the water flowing down from Wivenhoe here towards Lowood backfilled the Lockyer Valley Creek up at least to this point here at Clarendon and Rifle Range Road. So that's really interesting. Now let's have a look at the behaviour along the Brisbane River. Now let's focus on this stretch of the Brisbane River from Wivenhoe, winding down here past Lowood, Burton's Bridge, Colo Bridge, Colleges Crossing, down to there. Okay, so if we look at those charts, we can see the outflow and steady rise at the Wivenhoe Dam, and then downstream the river level at Lowood was raised up to 15 metres and then held relatively steady. A similar kind of looking graph a little bit further downstream at Burton's Bridge, similar kind of chart again, and you notice that these peaks seem to happen at around about the same time. So this is for Burton's Bridge, this is for Colo Bridge. Let's look at those on the map. So from Burton's Bridge down to Colo Bridge, this water rise was happening pretty much at the same time. Didn't take a lot of time for at least the effect of that water rise to be felt at those two different places, which are quite far apart. So obviously it takes time for the water to flow there, but it looks as though the river level was mirroring the behaviour at these two locations. Now let's have a look at Colleges Crossing here. And these bulges are happening at roughly the same time as well. Let's have a look at that again. Yeah, there's a little peak here and a little peak here. Similar thing. So that's quite curious in my mind. One of the interesting things though is that for these last 3 points, the final trend appears to be going upwards. Let's have a look at this stretch of the Brisbane River here, going from Mount Crosby, Corona Downs, down to Moggill here, and then say down to as far as Jindalee boat ramp. The interesting thing about this is there's a tributary coming in here, and this is the Bremer River coming from Ipswich, and Ipswich has received quite a lot of rain as well. So tracing the Bremer River back this way to Walloon, and then also the Worrell Creek, which flows into that as well. And I've got a few data points down here which show that there's quite a large catchment here that intersects the Brisbane River right there. So we should expect to see some different behaviour from Colleges Crossing and Mount Crosby up here to what happens downstream of that intersection. Okay, so we've got Colleges Crossing and Mount Crosby already in our tabs up here. Mount Crosby, Colleges Crossing. So let's now add these 3 points as well. That's Moggill, just below the intersection there. Aitchison Street, just around the bend, not very far downstream from Moggill. And then Jindalee, which is a little way further down, and that's pretty much the edge, or the western edge of Brisbane. Let's have a look at those. So from Mount Crosby, Colleges Crossing, still above that tributary for the Bremer River coming in. And then we've got Moggle. And then just around the corner, Aitchison Street, which we would expect to be very similar to Moggle. It's just right there. And then Brisbane River at Boat Ramp. This is Jindalee. So it's got a steady climb up here. And as you can probably see, looking through back to College's Crossing, still had these fairly distinct humps coming from Ivanhoe, and possibly the Lockyer Valley. But then after that, these upward slopes seem to be flattening out. So it's possible that the water coming in from the Bremer River and Roll Creek is influencing these three downstream points. So let's have a look at these Bremer River points to see whether they match up in any way. Right, so let's have a look at Walloon here. We'll add that on the end, and then Ipswich City, I'll add that at the end, and then Karalee, add that at the end, just bearing in mind that Karalee is actually just before Moggle here. So well, let's have a look at them anyway. So this is Walloon. So as you can see, we've got an earlier peak because the Ivanhoe water was coming up sort of roughly where I'm showing my arrow there. So there's an earlier peak coming down the Bremer River at Walloon, and then Ipswich. Ipswich was the peak there at about the same time as Walloon, or maybe a little bit later, which is what we'd expect. But then a steady increase after that at Ipswich, and then at Karalee, it's got a bit of a bump in here as well, and then a plateau. Now, why would that be? I wonder if at Karalee here, even though this is the Bremer River, perhaps there's a bit of backfill coming from the Brisbane River, and maybe that bump is represented by water coming down from Ivanhoe or the Lockyer Valley. And also at Karalee there's a plateauing, which we didn't see for Ipswich, just a little bit upstream, and also maybe a slight increase at Walloon further upstream. So that's interesting. Okay, now let's have a look at the map here, because it might be surprising, for example, at Ipswich to see this variation here, this diagonal variation. And in fact, this is the tide coming up the Brisbane River and then back up the Bremer River. And if we go back a little bit, the Bremer River at Walloon certainly doesn't have a tidal influence, but at Ipswich it does, and at Karalee it does as well, and a little bit bigger. And if we go back to Moggle, obviously on the Brisbane River, there's a tidal influence there, and that goes up as past College's Crossing, and I think that's it. So basically, the effect of the tide all the way on the ocean down off screen here, off Brisbane, the ocean's off to the right here, is felt all the way up the Brisbane River, and in fact even up the Bremer River to Ipswich, and further up the Brisbane River to this place called College's Crossing. So we have an effect of the tide as well, and that in fact could explain some of the variation that we saw. Let's see, bring this back here. Perhaps some of these bumps are the vestiges of tidal influence. Okay, let's look further downstream towards Brisbane then. Okay, so what we're going to do is focus from Mount Crosby down the river all the way to the city. Okay, so we're going to have a look from Lowood all the way down to the city. So that's from just just near the dam, Lowood up here, all the way down to the city, and we can see what we would expect to see is I suppose a bubble of water flowing down the river. So let's see if we can see that. Let's first have a look at the city gauge, which is right here, and as you would expect to see, there's a very strong tidal influence that close to the ocean, and a steady increase through Saturday, Sunday, and quite close to what's expected to be major level flooding. And in fact, just a few moments ago on my phone, a mass telephone message went out to Brisbane City residents, and some of my friends got it as well, which is in fact warning of major flooding along the Bremer River. So we've obviously hit this criteria here to trigger that message. So that's the Brisbane River at the city, which is strongly influenced by the ocean at this point here. So to raise the river there is quite extraordinary, and of course the city streets are at risk there in all of the major buildings. Let's step back from the city and see what this plot looks like. So upstream a little bit at St Lucia, where the university is, a little bit further up at Oxley, and then at the boat ramp. So what we've done here is we've travelled backwards from the city, St Lucia, Oxley Creek, and the boat ramp. Bearing in mind that Oxley Creek is a major tributary going into the Brisbane River as well. So we'd expect to see some impact from this catchment, which goes all the way up through Acacia Ridge into Sunnybank, Callum Vale. That's a substantial catchment area there. Okay, so do we see a bulge going back up the river? Let's see, this sort of starts to go up, say Saturday morning. This starts to go up Saturday morning. That bulge there looks to me it's at about the same time as there. So from the Brisbane city to St Lucia, I don't see a huge time delay. Okay, let's go a bit further. Oxley Creek mouth, that bulge is sort of roughly the same spot again, and not easy to see, but maybe that bulge is there at the Jindalee. So I'm not so sure about whether obviously the water, as I said before, takes time to go down that distance of the river, but the effect of the bulges going down the river seem to be happening at the same time. Or maybe it is just the tidal influence still happening there. This is at Moggill and Colleges Crossing. Now, if you compare between Moggill and Colleges Crossing, you can definitely see what appears to be a lead bulge. And that's quite surprising because oh no, it's not really surprising. Sorry, this is Moggill here, and there's quite a distance of river up to Colleges Crossing. So a bulge appearing at Colleges Crossing would take a little while to get down to Moggill. And of course, it's not just the distance, it's the shape and width of the river as well. And while we're here, let's have a look at some of these other creeks flowing into the Brisbane River. And this is very close to where I live here at Salisbury. Fortunately, we're on the top of a hill. But some of these suburbs here, Yeronga, Tennyson, Fairfield, West End, St Lucia, and potentially Graceville as well, are likely to suffer if the river level rises here. There were substantial floods in 2011 in Graceville, and really quite serious floods in West End, and then along the northern bank here, Toowong, Milton, as well as the city itself. Downstream of the city, the river level was more or less mitigated by the fact that it's wider and is also opening out to the ocean, so you can't really raise the ocean level. Although in 2011 there was a king tide that actually fed back up here, and that made the city and city flood a little bit higher than would otherwise have been the case. But if we look at these little feeder creeks here, this is Stable Swamp Creek, close to where I live. As you can see, a bit of tidal variation here, but basically this is on its way up and considered to be major flooding from the middle of today, actually. And that's reflected in the reports around the suburb. This is Oxley Creek at Corinda High School. So again, quite normal tidal variations here, a surge of water coming down the Brisbane River and then a steady increase. And that is the pattern. It's 9:30 p.m. on Sunday evening. Steady rises coming into this stretch down into the city. So that could explain why we now have a major flood warning that's just been issued for the Brisbane River here. And I hope everyone stays safe. What I will do is I will share this map in the video description below, so you're welcome to have a look at that. Thanks very much for listening, and wishing everybody well on this nerve-wracking night in Southeast Queensland, and particularly Brisbane and Ipswich. Thank you.